Boom, boom, aka laka boom, 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 aka laka boom, boom. Hey, welcome back, everybody, to Let's Remember Skies of Arcadia. How are you? Hope you're doing well. I am in very jovial spirits. Turns out we needed to talk to the ship parts merchant, and he would fly us right over to Mount Kazai. I hope you'll forgive me. There are some things in this game I don't remember as well as I should, which fills me with a fair amount of shame. Definitely the navigation through the Dark Rift, that's a weird episode, and if you know your way around the Dark Rift, you can get through it in like 20 minutes, but I just totally got lost. It's been a while since I've played this game. I remember a lot of things, but I've forgotten some niceties, so I hope you will forgive me. Anyway, we are at Mount Kazai, and we immediately get to start off with a view of Blueheim, the Gigas, the blue Gigas of Yafutoma. A really cool one. It flies around, it's this giant bird. I like this too because it's right in front of us, and we see it the same way that we see Rakumin at the start of the Temple of Pyron, except this time we actually have an understanding of, like, oh, that is a Gigas, which is something that we didn't have before. Also, Rakumin wasn't, Rakumin seemed more like part of the architecture than like a beast trapped inside of formerly molten rock. On our way over, we picked up an underwater suit, and we use that to navigate underwater. The camera is messed up, but that's because of the way that I am playing this game, and not anything to do with sort of intention behind the creators of the game, the developers and designers. So we'll talk about Mount Kazai very briefly. Mount Kazai, first off, they do a good job of framing this button right here so that you can see what the results are going to be. Mount Kazai is a water level, of course, given the nature of the moonstone that we are pursuing. And it is a level with a lot of verticality to it, and it is both a very cool thing and a very annoying thing. Cool because it's another way for Skies to continue to offer us interesting forms of engaging with the space. So all of this down here, if I can get a view, we're eventually going to head down there. We're actually going to jump off of this center platform into raised water and fall straight down to the bottom, and it's going to be really cool. So Skies continues to have spaces that have certain navigational gimmicks to them, and I always want to stress that when I say gimmick, I just mean sort of a trick, right? I'm sort of saying gimmick free of any inherent judgment. These things just are what they are. That is a dead end. You tricked me, game. I just mean that most dungeons have sort of one central core notion of how their space is handled. Shrine Island had it very simply, where we were removing impediments in the space. And in fact, this is almost a reverse Shrine Island, which I find very noteworthy to a certain extent or another. Although I think Shrine Island pulls things off a little bit more elegantly, because there's not as many layers of obfuscation as there are in Mount Kazai, and we can talk about that later on. Fina, I want to switch to green magic, because hopefully in this dungeon I can have her learn Sacrilem, which is the high-level healing spell that will heal us to full immediately, which will be great because we have ship battles in the upcoming segments. Some very fun and exciting, but still sort of difficult ship battles that we would certainly benefit from having an instant full heal spell. So that's the choice for that. Mount Kazai is this really good space for leveling your characters, so that's going to be one of the reasons why I'm not going to particularly run away from enemies in this segment, but that's also because in order to recruit a very important crew member coming up, I need to have the pirate ranking of Vise the Daring or higher. Now, that's not hard for me to get. There's going to be a lot of dialogue options in the upcoming segments for the entire Yafutoma arc, as it were. a lot of stuff happens, and I have a lot of chances to sort of get those swashbuckling points. But I also need to just sort of avoid running away from some battles right now. Which isn't too bad, but still, that can make this space, because at this point in the game, I'm trying to do a lot of specific things. And so recruiting certain crew members is on that list, and that means no running away. I wanted to head, and this is another thing, just navigation of the raw spaces is something that's sort of lost to me. I want to find the Wind Song Orb, which is something I promised that I would do, and I know it's sort of off the beaten path a little bit. Their affinity is all blue, we are yellow, so we are good to go. Except for Fina, but that's okay. Blue actually does less damage against green, so she's in a defensively strong position. So there's really not much more for me to talk about when it comes to Mount Kazai, besides the fact that the game continues to use verticality in ways that are interesting, and it also continues to offer us spaces that are not just completely linear. So, I mean, there's some backtracking and moving about the space and re-engaging with it, which is something that this game, I think, does predominantly well. I think it's one of its strengths when it comes to the design of the levels. I thought that Aika would do more damage, but she didn't. My controller's going nuts. But that's sort of that. That said, I want to move on to a topic that I've discussed before, and that's the notion of heroes. Now, I'm sometimes afraid, given how inconsistently cogent I can be, I sort of swing back from topic to topic very quickly a lot when I'm playing, because there's so much happening and my mind is thinking of like 9 different things, etc., etc. I've sort of talked about this before. I'm afraid that at times when I've approached certain subjects, I've not necessarily given them quite as clear and exegeting as they probably deserve. So, with Skies of Arcadia, I have said this game makes me believe in heroes, and it also reminds me of how few that we have. Now, this is something I've focused on writing about for a while now, and it's something I'm hoping to put out a larger piece on, but I sort of want to explain, just in general terms, sort of what I am talking about a little bit more. Yeah, here's a button. I want to hit the button. So, let's talk about the importance of symbols. And to do so, let's use an example that Baudrillard uses. And when I talk about the example, it will seem inherently negative, but it's just an example of how symbols can be self-serving. And I hope that I can make the case that my desire in looking at Skies of Arcadia is not completely self-serving or self-effacing. So Baudrillard talks about the notion of, at the time, they were preserving the body of, I believe it was King Tutankhamun, King Tut. He's an Egyptian. And he says that the preservation of King Tut's body had very, very little to do with an actual desire to preserve true history. Which is to say that King Tut's body was not being preserved because of any general respect for the historical relevance that he might have had, right? They were preserving King Tut for a different reason. And that's because King Tut had become this sort of symbol in the minds of society of a connection to history that made them feel important. So King Tut pointed to an idea of Egypt, which then pointed to an idea of broader history, in which modern individuals felt important, or individuals who were modern of that time. So in preserving King Tut, their concern was not preserving actual history, it was preserving a notion of history that was probably false to begin with. So this notion of, well, here's this ruler from, ages past, and we can trace a sort of historicity from him to us. And in doing so, it was this thing that made people feel important. It sort of assured themselves of their own historical self-worth. So that's an example of how, symbols can be bad, but it helps express the notion of what symbols do. Symbols become visual shorthands or mental shorthands, frantic shorthands, that point to certain ideas that we then feel in a very real sense, or we sort of take pleasure in knowing that they exist, right? So when King Tut's body is preserved, the people who are preserving them take solace in the fact that King Tut is preserved, because the preservation marks a preservation of a certain attitude toward history. So when I talk about heroes in Skies of Arcadia, something similar is happening, but I don't necessarily think it is as self-effacing, although it is still certainly somewhat centered upon my own need for certain reassurances. So let's use Vise as an example. Throughout the story, we have seen Vise act in ways that we might consider traditionally heroic. He jumps at the call, he goes to great lengths to protect his friends, he is brave, he is audacious, he is fundamentally kind. These are traits that we can also say of other characters, and in fact, I want to sit down and really, as I've alluded to before, talk about Fina in a more comprehensive manner, because I think there are multiple reasons why Fina resonates with me. The least of which is sort of what she represents for my notion of, my idealized self, which is a sort of value that I gain from Fina via projection. But Vise, when I see Vise and his behavior, those behaviors become sort of entrenched in my mind, and I eventually see Vise not just as a character, but as a symbol pointing towards certain ideas, the aforementioned ones. So Vise has value not just as a character within the narrative or an actor which I control, but also as a symbol that I come to recognize as important, and one that comes to reaffirm certain ideas that I believe in. So Vise's behavior and what it ends up sort of forming in my mind in the symbol that is Vise. Vise points towards certain ideas which I don't know are necessarily true, but they are ideas I want to believe in. So in this case, they are things like self-sacrifice or another dead end. Not another dead end. Self-sacrifice, or, grace under pressure, or a sort of general goodness, as vague a term as that might be. And so when I say that, Vise is a symbol, or that this game has heroes, to me, it's this notion that through the behavior that they exhibit in the game, the characters that I am controlling, and actually we can switch Vise to red here to have him do a little bit more damage as well. The characters point to certain ideas that I find reassurance in the believing of, right? So I don't know if justice or any of these other things exist in the real world, and perhaps this is a repetition of things that I've talked about previously in the Let's Play, but I'm also concerned that people might think that my desire for heroes comes from a desire for simplistic narratives or childish notions of good versus evil, and I want to stress that that is not the case. What I think I see in Skies of Arcadia that I see lacking in certain other games is this notion of games being able to express the importance of certain ideas via the symbols that they create. So let us talk about a modern day gaming symbol, and this will not be a sort of criticism that you haven't heard before if you've engaged with games for a certain amount of time. So let's talk about Nathan Drake. So there's a marked difference between what I see in Vise and what I see in Nathan Drake. Now, make no mistake, Drake is a fun character. The Uncharted games are absolutely riotous and exciting, and represent some of the best sort of popcorn action that you could ever ask for from a game. But, Nathan Drake himself, were I to, judge Nathan Drake based upon how the industry wants me to judge Nathan Drake, represents a sort of everyman, an average Joe. Even though there's nothing particularly average about Nathan Drake, whether it's his abilities or his occupation. But because our games tend to center around super soldiers or, magical princesses or heroes with, swords that banish evil, we tend to see Nathan Drake as an everyman character because he doesn't have any of those sort of extra bits of semi-mythical accoutrement. But Nathan Drake himself, as a symbol, is a pretty shitty symbol for games to have, because his behaviors and his deeds point to ideas that are fundamentally sort of perverted, or at least not... I need to go back through the water. I turned around backwards. I got so caught up in talking that I went backwards. Drake points to certain ideas, right? Drake points to a certain type of bravery, but Drake also points to a bravado, an arrogance, a sort of aloofness that I, and possibly other people, might find to be, if not repulsive, then certainly not becoming of, the potential of video games to express certain ideas. And as I've said, not everything needs to be perfect. Uncharted would be interesting to me a little bit more if they pointed out how flawed Nathan Drake was, and they do this to a certain extent in Uncharted 3. They point out the fact that the identity of Nathan Drake is also one that Nate has sort of forged for himself. So I mean, there's interesting components to that, but compare what I see in Vise to what I see in Nathan Drake. I see a shared bravery, but Drake points to a certain amount of negative things, while Vise, if perhaps due to my own sense of nostalgia or childhood love of the character, or even a simplistic formation of the ideas that he represents in my mind, points to generally positive and reaffirming notions that I want to believe in. And he points to them as a symbol for me so hard that, as I've said before, I believe that these things are real. So when I talk about the importance of heroes in games, it is because they can evoke very important and strong feelings within the player. And symbols can come from various different points of reference within the game. They don't have to be characters. Characters just tend to be the easiest ways for us to find our symbols. Because it's easy for us to sort of find some sort of, empathetic connection to characters, because they're human, we are human, that sort of thing. Let me just see if there's anything down here. There's not. Oh, there is. There's only so many chests within this dungeon. So my general point being that when I talk about heroes, it is not a desire for some sort of reductive yesteryear or whatever, even though I think it is very important for us not to forsake sort of the roots of gaming, which I think were grounded in a certain sense of playfulness and sort of quote-unquote traditional heroism, where people, went on quests and helped to save the world and things like that. This is the Windsong Orb. Or it should be, but this is also a Zebulon Bane. I got distracted because of the Ziv Bane. The general point being that games have the capacity to form these sort of images, I think, stronger, no, controller, don't go too crazy, stronger than certain mediums, because we have the added sort of benefit of interaction, which, interaction, yeah, everybody loves interaction, blah, blah, blah. But also because we spend more time with game characters than we tend to do with movie characters, or sometimes even characters in books. Although books tend to get symbols down fairly well, for reasons that I'm not going to explicate now. My general point being that I don't think that Skies of Arcadia is necessarily pointing towards an image in my mind of heroes that is reductive or simplistic, nor do I want it to point to an idea that is reductive or simplistic. I think that the game actually does point to a certain form of heroism and other ideas in my mind, and it does it by using sort of cliche methods, but or we might even say broad methods. This is going to hit Fina? She's done. It does so by using broad methods, but then those broad methods can be applied very strongly. The reason why broadness in this game makes it effective is the same reason why broadness in a character like Captain America makes Captain America effective. Now, you might be tempted to sit back and say, well, okay, Captain America is this character that is representative of purely American ideals. Which is an argument that you can make, considering that, he was created in 1941, going into, World War II, that era of time, and it was important for the country to, or at least, and forgive me for being sort of American-centric in the formation of my ideas, but I swear the Captain America point will move beyond that. So he pointed towards certain American ideals during a time when Americans really needed affirmation of those ideals, but as time goes on, Captain America sort of goes from being this sort of individual that represents the establishment and who represents just American ideals, and because of his broadness comes to represent more general ideas, something like justice or honesty, right? And one of the ways that you can see that these ideas are more universal and sort of more appealing is the fact that Captain America Winter Soldier did amazingly well in China. So you would think that maybe an American symbol wouldn't do as well in China, but we have to then understand the final point I want to make about heroes, and that is that when properly used and sort of their broadness embraced, they can point towards general ideas that transcend sort of cultural boundaries, right? So Vise is just as relevant to me as a Western sort of audience member as he might be to an Eastern audience member. I hope this is the Windsong Orb. Yes, awesome. So, and that can happen a lot. There's arguments I think that people make often that symbols are entirely tied towards their culture, which I don't think is true necessarily. Certainly, we understand the value of their actions based upon the cultural background that they're written in. So, my understanding of Achilles and Hector and sort of their struggle needs to fundamentally be formulated by understanding, of ancient Greek values. But Achilles can... I'm, for some reason, having trouble saying Achilles, because I almost said Hector halfway through, so I almost said a Hector. Achilles and Hector can point towards larger ideas than just the cultural sort of beliefs that they reaffirm in their own story. They can become something broader. And that's why those stories have persisted. That's why myth is a thing of such power. So the general point is that heroes become symbols that point to ideas, and these ideas are important, and these ideas transcend cultural boundaries. the friendship of Gilgamesh to Enkidu, Gilgamesh being the example of a mythical hero. That friendship, when we sort of encounter it, and let's acknowledge too that Gilgamesh is not, sort of by our modern standards perhaps, perfect by any means, nor is a character like Beowulf, right? Beowulf gets angry and he flies into rages and things like that, you know, which causes all sorts of associated trouble, you know. He kills Grendel, but then Grendel's mom is a thing, and blah blah blah. Heroes can have these sort of cultural things to them, but then heroes can have values expressed in them that transcend cultural sort of lines. I don't know why I used Royal Blade there, mostly because I'm talking more than I'm doing anything, and I hope that this discussion is more stimulating than anything that happened during the fucking Dark Rift playthrough, because I was out of my mind then. But yeah, so Gilgamesh's sort of love for Enkidu is this really affecting thing. And I don't need to have lived eons ago to get value from it. Nor do I need to have lived, you know, in that time with those values. So games have this task that they can pull off or fail to pull off. And I don't think it is the sole providence of games to concern themselves with this, but I do think that they should take care in some respects to consider how they are expressing certain images. Games can give us true heroes, and heroes that transcend a lot of certain boundaries. Holy crap. I need the water level higher over here, for sure. So I need to go into another section. So the last one that I'll point to is think of Link and Zelda. Link points very strongly towards certain ideas, some of which are the same ideas that I see in Vi's. Bravery, sort of a desire to help others, right? Sort of selflessness. Zelda has this too. Zelda is brave. Zelda is kind. And that kindness, right? Those ideas expressed by Link and Zelda are not something that are, say, exclusive to Japan, right? Although a Japanese player might find certain values reinforced by actually let's use Justice Shield because we're talking about ideas.
May righteousness be our shield of justice.
You know, a Japanese player might find certain cultural norms are reinforced by Zelda, and I might see certain different cultural norms. You know, I might see, you know, sort of Western fantasy where, you know, someone else might see something different depending on their cultural background, but there are still these general ideas that Link and Zelda point to, and they point to them very strongly, and it's allowed them to persist as characters that we, A, care about over so many years, and B, are constantly used over and over again. This is why archetypes are a thing. And so games in their narratives and sort of how their gameplay can back up those narratives and a lot of different things can help to express certain ideas through the symbols they create. Any art form can do this. But I think it is important to stress that when I talk about heroes in Skies of Arcadia, as I have been for probably like 15 minutes now, I'm not looking for a return to simple stories of knights storming castles to rescue princesses, because we don't need princesses to be rescued anymore. We can have princesses that kick ass themselves and all sorts of things. Our sort of cultural ideas of heroism have changed, but I think we still need heroes. And I think games at the moment are doing a poor job of shaping their heroes compared to, say, the way that heroes are shaped and formulated in Skies of Arcadia. I need to check on Fina's magic. I swear to God, that she was really close to learning Sacralin. That doesn't get reset when you die. If you did, that would be entirely insane. You would never gain any magic. I just really want her to have that skill. So I believe the one that we need to drop down is this one. We'll find out in a minute. So in this room you have to drop down to reach a certain platform that you can then take to the other edge of the room. And yes, this is the correct one. Awesome. See, there are some things I do vaguely remember about these games. Otherwise, this is one of the pitfalls of Mount Kazai. The vertical space is interesting, but you keep on landing on the wrong platform and you keep on falling down. You have to go around and around. And when you're underwater, you know, your movement is impeded because you're moving slower. And all sorts of things. So Mount Kazai navigation can be interesting, but it can also be sort of a true pain in the ass. But you know, that's sort of the price that you pay when you sort of bake certain gimmicks into your dungeon. You can have navigation that is interesting, but it also sometimes comes at certain costs. Now, I'm not trying to absolve Mount Kazai of its flaws. It's actually one of the more, in my mind, forgettable spaces in Skies of Arcadia. But at a bare minimum, the game definitely, as I sort of previously stated, is still trying to make you engage with spaces in different ways, and it does that by altering the language of your navigation. Navigation or movement being a mechanic, which is a mode of interaction, changes to that mode of interaction, establishing a sort of understood language with the game. But you can see, I'm taking this long just to get back up to the top. Imagine if I had dropped down the wrong hole, and imagine if I had done it multiple times. It certainly would make things a little annoying. And I will continue to fight in this segment because of the aforementioned reasons. Also, just getting some experience points is really nice. I was going to say, if it's these guys, they're all green, which means that red will do fine, and that they won't do any extra damage against Fina. As I've moved through the game, I've started to remember much more intensely the sort of elemental things that are at play. And now that I'm at a point where everyone's magic, except for Fina's, is basically at the point that I want it to be, I don't need to worry about much else. I can sort of use the elemental system to my advantage. A very rudimentary concept of this beats this, right? Games do it all the time, but it works. And so one of the things that Skies teaches us is that if it isn't broken, you don't always have to fix it. You know? Nor do you need to try and make the next, newest, best version of it, right? I wish I had a better analogy, but it's like, okay, I have a push vacuum. That allows me to clean up the carpet fairly well. Maybe I don't need to buy a super fancy hyper vacuum. It's a terrible analogy, but I hope the point is being expressed clearly enough. Skies of Arcadia has a certain elegance to it, I believe, and that elegance comes from a lack of desire to do too much that is extensively different or radical. It just takes the tools that it has and uses them to very great effect. Or so I believe. I think perhaps there are times where the amount that I put into defending this game or trying to express the value that I find in this game may be lost on certain people, because the game can be very simple. But I think everybody has a game that speaks to them in a very strong way, and I think very often that those games are simple games. Now, often that is sort of tied to nostalgia, but but sometimes it is tied to sort of the systems that are in play in games, or sort of how they are being used. In Skies, I appreciate the simplicity of the game, because I think that simplicity also reinforces the honesty that I find the game sort of has. So the honesty of the story is reflected by the honesty and the lack of pretension in the mechanics. Which is probably an unintended consequence of the ludic sort of structure of the game. Ludic, a bizarre game, game term, rather. But the point is that, you know, the way that certain interactions are available to me, I forget exactly which room is the right room. This is it, but how do I get... Oh. I need to raise more water. Oh, I might be able to just by hitting that crystal. Maybe I could have done it the whole time. Or maybe that is the one that raises the bridge. At one point, you raise a bridge in here to get to the other side, and so I wonder if that will just raise the bridge. But I need to find one more switch, and so now I am entering into territory where I go, well, I'm vaguely lost in this space again, but not terribly so. So I think I'll manage. And then we'll fight the last boss, and then what follows after is very interesting. Or I believe so. I think that as this game goes on longer, it sort of matures in the narrative that it tells too. We had hints of this with Esperanza, even though I'm not going to profess that the game is particularly complex, but it moves away from sort of supremely romantic notions, even though it is still a very romantic game, I believe. And then also moves towards adding layers of complexity to the interactions between characters that did not necessarily exist before. So Enrique and Gregoria was a good example of this. We didn't have much particular love for Valua, and so through Enrique and Gregoria we reassess sort of our thoughts about what Valua can be compared to what it is. Arguably, you can get this with other characters in other games. This is why Reeve is sort of a really important character in Final Fantasy VII. Because he doesn't necessarily make you reevaluate your understanding of Shinra, because Shinra continues to be shitty throughout the whole game, as does Valua. But you do understand that there are people who are involved in Shinra who are decent. Same thing happens with Valua in this game. So either this raises the bridge or lowers some more water. I want to say it raises the bridge. Yes, very cool. Oh no, well, it raises the bridge while raising water. Which I think brings us to our last switch, which should fill up the main room. And then we should be able to jump down and fight the boss. Although, when we get down to the bottom, we will also find a wonderful moonberry and some other things. Now, where exactly am I moving in this space then? There we are, in the corner. The camera is sort of messed up in this version that I'm playing, unfortunately. So it's hard for me to immediately see where I need to go. But we'll have not like a great deal of complication, but I mean, we will have some engagement in this space that will sort of challenge our thoughts a little bit. I mean, we had you know, sort of simple approaches towards important issues back in Ixutaka, so slavery and sort of treatment of native peoples and things like that. A phrase that I've probably said plenty of times in trying to explain why I think Ixutaka is still valuable as an experience in this game, despite how broad it might be, despite how broad something like Nazar is as well. Which is all good and well. I think they do a decent job in Ixutaka without sort of dramatically messing about with the tone that they've established for the game. The tone shifts eventually as we move forward, but as we sort of move forward in each part of the game, we approach issues of increasing complexity, or at least they are presented with increasing complexity. So while Ixutaka was about sort of first contact, so is Yafutoma, but Yafutoma does it in, I think, a more interesting way and a more nuanced way, which we will talk about sort of as those things occur. But the game sort of, I like the notion that the game sort of matures as we move through it as well, as the player matures and as the characters sort of become more worldly as well. And at the same time, it never sort of loses track of sort of what it is as sort of a broader sort of game as well, which is nice. So that allows the game to talk about certain specific issues, perhaps not in a comprehensive manner, but still paying attention to those issues. And then it also doesn't forget the strength that comes with the broadness that it has established. So now we have everything filled up here. Now we get to do a really cool dive down into the bottom of the dungeon. I'm going to heal us up. And if I can, actually, let me look at her status. Can I look at her status? She still has nothing equipped, which is annoying. So Fina's next rank up in green is at level 99. Or 99 points, rather, not level 99. So as we move through other spaces, maybe I will be tempted to put green on there more often. I will certainly have the magic that I want by the end of the game. This game not being particularly difficult to sort of get what you want. Here I'll sort of get rid of the map so we can see us descend downwards. It's much grander with a better camera angle. I can't really control that, but this is probably the most interesting sort of engagement with the space. Sort of the payoff to everything that happened before. I'm just rotating the camera to see and establish sort of how big that center space is. But now we're getting near the end of the dungeon, which is fantastic. And so the rope is there, which means off to the right on this pathway, or further down this pathway, is a moonberry chest, but over here should be, haha, the Cham. Mount Kazai for as forgettable a space as you are. I do remember some things about you. You tend to remember spaces that give you a lot of cool things right away. I don't think Cupel will have transformed either, but he could have. Cupel Spear, okay. So he did transform, and we'll show that off. But Cupel is running out of transformations, like, big time. So I think there's maybe, like, 1 or 2 more plus final Cupel. So we've done a fairly good job of getting our Chams, which I feel really good about, even though there have been times where I've needed to sort of slow down the action and go back and grab them. That's just sort of me wanting to have that sort of equipment for Fina because I value the ability to give her more of a role outside of healing. Oh, actually, you know what's a smart thing that I should have been doing, but I haven't been doing, is near the end of rounds, here's a pro tip. If you don't want to waste magic, wait near the end of a round, build up your spirit points, leave like one enemy really close to death, and use Lunar Light. Because that will heal the party to full, and you don't need to worry about anything else. That was Cupel Spear. But that's the thing, if you're ever playing this game and you are low on MP, that is one of your options available to you, is to take advantage of the fact that while it is a higher SP cost, there's no MP cost associated to Lunar Light. So if you just use that at the end of a round, you can leave the battle with full health. it becomes something that you can use to your advantage quite a bit later on in sort of near endgame dungeons. If you're struggling with maintaining your magic points, or you haven't, properly invested, some money in healing items.
That was easy.
But we are close to where we want to be. I don't know how many moonberries we have. If we have enough, I am tempted to actually get Enrique's final ability. Although if I do that, that sort of seals the deal as Enrique being my fourth party member for good, but... Okay, so we only have the one moonberry anyway, so it doesn't matter. His final ability is really cool, though. But so is everybody's. All the abilities in this game are very satisfying. So now we are moving towards where we want to go. And there's not a lot of space to get lost in here, or at least I don't recall there being a lot of space to get lost in here. So we should be doing fairly well. Trying to sit and figure out what I want to do for my action here. Is there... Crystallum doesn't hit everybody. I wish it did, but it doesn't. So we'll do that.
Yeah.
I'm sort of captivated by the space for a moment. This is a longer episode than I thought it would be too. I remember navigation through Mount Kazai not being too long, but I think the thing that's elongating it is these enemy encounters. And I truly don't want to run away from any of them at this point of the game. Luckily soon on the overworld map we will have options to be able to move around the map without encountering random encounters. Encountering random encounters, another redundant sentence of mine that I'm very good at forming those. But we will be able to move such that we won't need to worry about random encounters if we so choose.
We did it!
And when I have that freedom of movement, I'll probably do some off-camera work picking up some discoveries. And we might show off getting some more crew members as we move forward. Specifically Dawn, Ryukan if we have the right rank, Domingo because we'll have enough discoveries, and then Ilkmis, or however I'm supposed to pronounce the name, who will be a sort of alchemist merchant that we can get. Alright, what are they? Silver? They're blue. Guess we have to kick their asses. Silver's a weird affinity. I think I've talked about it before. It's strong against yellow, but the only thing that it's also weak against is yellow. I just want to see how much Enrique will do for singular damage here. Right now, Royal Blade seems to be hitting harder than Cutlass Fury, but I mean, if I use Pirate's Wrath, the comparison, like, there's no comparison at all. But I'm just curious to see. Probably in the thousands? Oh. Maybe not. So maybe half of that, but still pretty damaging. I've exhausted myself a little bit talking about heroes. Maybe I'll put that in its own little nugget as well. Ooh. Oh, that's because she just had Drain put on her. I was like, why is she doing such a terrible amount of damage? Again, Fika... I just said Aika and Fina and mashed them together, sort of DBZ fusion style. Aika is not a direct damage dealer. She is, she's crowd control through and through. Whereas Fina can still sort of swing into direct damage if we want her to. Do we have enough? Yeah, so this is Lunar Light. Let's show it off. It's pretty great. It's really nice imagery too. Sort of a dead world turning alive, which I really enjoy. So I'm gonna fight a couple battles as I get to where we need to go.
Here goes.
Oh yeah, and it will unpetrify Vise. It heals everything.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll be able to fire it off again before the end of the round, but I think we'll be okay. We'll see. I just have Ica attack to do some small damage. This might actually get rid of the enemy here. If not, we'll use Lunar Light in the next round to sort of do that thing, like I said, where we cheat, but Fina might actually get the enemy right here. So, if I was really desperate, I could have held off, but it's not that big of a deal. We're getting closer to the boss, and I want to sort of have that done with. And I want to move through at a fair pace so that I can sort of get us to where we want to be, because this will drain the water and I believe in theory bring us down to where we want to go, or actually you sort of use it to traverse backwards and forwards throughout this room. So another sense where engagement with the space is sort of interesting, and Skies is really obsessed with levels and height and things like that, but it's not that hard to move around because all we're doing is sort of making a loop around the room so that we can go through this sort of little hallway that will take us towards where we want to go, where we will get our wonderful moon crystal. Or maybe I didn't even need to do that. Am I going backwards? I might be going backwards. I'm zoned out for a minute. And I'm wondering if I should run away from this fight. We're probably getting close to an hour, and we haven't fought the last boss. Yeah, their backs are turned, so I'll do it.
Retreat!
I hate having to do that. Well, I don't have to, but I want to balance your time investment and not take advantage of it. Yeah, so that's where we came from. Shit. Fucking camera, too. Sometimes the camera in this game is not what it really should be, or at least what I would like it to be. So we didn't even need to do that bullshit loop stuff, I don't think. Oh, there's a lot of enemies here. That's part of the problem. Like this hallway, it's just like Alusphere after Alusphere after Alusphere. Right? So I think maybe that's what the purpose of the bridge is. Oh my shit, my controller. It just never wants to cooperate. But if we want to, we can sort of hold off, and we're probably gonna just run through the gauntlet. And maybe I'll put an annotation so you can skip through the run of the gauntlet somewhere around here. And that will be that. But this is also like, sometimes I just need to play the game in front of you, and this is sort of going to happen. There's probably somebody laughing and going like, oh, you can just use the water to go up and over, but it's like, I don't care. I don't care. I will level up my characters, everything will be hunky fucking dory, and we'll be okay. Rain of Swords, a skill that I find middling value in, rears its head in these sort of encounters to do a fair amount of damage against these enemies. And now I'm mostly just talking about the gameplay again, as opposed to any of the ideas that I want to express, you know, or that I've found expressed in the game. And that will... Oh, she got debuffed. That's why I'm like, 0. Holy hell. So we'll sort of deal with it as we move forward. Oh, so they inflict stone twice. That's not redundant or ridiculous or anything. So we'll focus, we'll use Lunar Light in the next round, and then we will just attack the next enemy. This episode becoming longer than I planned to have it be, which is sort of unfortunate, or at least I think unfortunate. And so we can use both Lunar Light and Cutlass Fury. And that will recover Enrique. You can see it's an amazing skill. Like, their debuffs are gone, we're at full health. It's wonderful. Like, it's such an amazing skill. And it's a relatively low cost at 18. Man, Enrique not getting a break today.
Here goes.
And I'll be more concerned with talking about sort of the cultural implications of what's going on once we return to Yafutsoma proper. Now we're just in pure, like, let's discuss JRPG territory again as we move down this sort of gauntlet hallway. And perhaps as we do this, we might get Fina to where we want to with her magic, which would be an extra bonus. Although it's only 3 magic experience per each, and she needs quite a bit. Yeah. You know what? No. The game was trying to tell me something before with the other things, so I'm not putting up with any of this bullshit right now. Great experience, but not quite what I want, is it? So I changed my mind. No gauntlet. So the annotation actually led here instead. Ha 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 ha. And hopefully I'm doing this little bit of platformy move about stuff correctly. But I can look about the space to be sure. Crap baskets. No, there's the, I was like, there's a hallway. But of course there's random encounters. This last tail end of the episode has gotten fairly sedate, but I think the energy of what we had at the first half was fairly decent, so I'm not too disappointed. Actually, we can just attack. I'm not too worried. Although they're defending, which sucks. But we'll do a decent amount of damage here, unless they dodge. What the hell? They're pretty swift enemies, though. Cupel Spear, doing a good job. The boss here it's not a hard boss, but it's another one of those things where Skies falters because it fails to give any context to the boss, besides maybe, like, this is an ancient space, therefore there are monsters that will do these things, or exist in these spaces. It's not like what we had with Shrine Island, where the history of the space was a little bit more implied, and you could see the boss from the start and all of these things. And it's certainly not like anything we have when we're in a properly, like, truly contextualized space like the Grand Fortress or anything like that. So that's one of my big disappointments, is that in this dungeon, and when we get to the dungeon for the Purple Moon, the game sort of doubles down on just, like, giving you a ridiculous boss to fight, and not, like, a boss with any contextual purpose besides just being a boss. So if there's a major criticism to be had of Skies, ignoring the excessive encounter rate, it's that occasionally it will give you these really cool spaces, and then, these spaces with sort of implied histories to them, but they won't follow through on the promise of those spaces, because they will just sort of have have it fizzle out towards the end. They will just sort of have like, oh, I guess there's a monster here. We had that in Rixus a little bit. Although in Rixus it didn't feel necessarily as egregious as it does here, nor with the Temple of Pyron. Temple of Pyron certainly had a thing where like that felt like a temple guardian or whatever. Here, this sort of has that feel, but not as much as it could, which is unfortunate. Although this does have the benefit of being one of the trickier bosses in the game, just based upon some of the abilities that it has, but because we have Justice Shield, we will be in fairly good shape. But this is sort of the end of the dungeon. I should save, but I'm not going to. Not at all. So like this space, like look at this. This is cool, right? Sort of this swirling energy surrounding this sort of dome or temple-like space where the moonstone is kept. And I think they even vaguely say like, well, it must be like sort of the security thing, but it's like, eh. Basically, this is just a giant crystal turtle from like nowhere, right? And you might want to sit back and say like, oh, the ancients created it to guard their crystal, blah, blah, blah. But the crystal, I forget the implied history of the crystal or what we've been told about it. It's not always been in Mount Kazai anyway, or something, I don't know. The point is that it's sort of like, it's just such a random boss, and it feels like it lacks so much context that I have a problem with it. And it seems like such a strange thing to really sit back and be like, I have a problem with this boss because of this reason, but I truly do. Like, it just lacks any proper, most people are yellow already. Good. It just lacks any sort of real, contextualizing, and I'm not worried about healing Fina right now, but I will have her guard, and I will use Justice Shield. Just as we build up, we want to be strong. This enemy, if I remember correctly, it can harden its shell, basically, to make it a little harder to attack. So what we want to do is build up to large attacks. So one of the things I want to build up to actually is something like Prophecy. So as I use Focus, and the only thing that will delay me on the way there is Justice Shield, and then I'll use Lunar Light once, maybe, if things get dire. But the idea is, I build up all of our Focus, and then I can, whenever you use Prophecy or Blue Rogues, it is the first attack of the round, no matter what. So it might do something like this. It might use Wevlin or other type of attacks, but we're generally able to acquit ourselves decently, and sort of build up our healing and everything as we go along. Although on our way there, we will use Lunar Light, sort of resetting us towards our baseline. But then after that, we can just focus, and attack. Because really, the use of Steelskin here, this is why I say it's a tough boss. It's because you can be like, oh, I'm going to use all of these special attacks or whatever, but it basically has a 100% assured way to negate physical attacks. So it's almost more prudent to do the time investment, build up your spirit points, and just use your really crazy, like, ultra, super, mega power attacks. And yeah, we are definitely past the 1 hour mark on this, so we will get through here and we will get back to Yafatoma as quick as we can manage. We might even end on this boss's death. And also, look at this. It can use Sacralen. As I've previously established, Sacralen can heal the enemy back to full. So we need to find ways to damage it really quickly. So what I really want to do is I want to use Prophecy once here and just knock it out of the park, really. And then from there I can use Pirate's Wrath and Justice Blade or whatever to the best of my ability. In theory I should have buffed people, but I'm not going to. This will do a fair amount of damage because we're not using our shield. But it's sort of worth it as we move forward so that we can do this. And actually, you can't skip the attack animation of Prophecy. So you get to see us all use a moon to attack the bad guy.
To battle our foe.
So here we go. As I've said, this boss, aside from being just like lacking in context and something just I don't enjoy, like the skills it has to it, like let's negate your physical damage, let's revive my health to full. It's freaking bizarre, and I need to just start throwing caution to the wind. I want it to open up with a strong attack, and go from there. Because I'll just use Pirate's Wrath and Royal Blade or whatever it is. I always get them confused because I don't tend to use Enrique very often. Aika's Delta Shield does not negate magic cast in this context. I believe Epsilon Mirror does, but not this. And unfortunately we need to use Lunar Light. This is just not a boss encounter that I care for very much. But I wanted to get off that big sort of first burst, and we'll go from there. Again, I really do like the imagery here. The flowers and everything coming from the dead earth. Reinforces the notion in my mind of these moons as these really powerful magical forces. More so than you might get from just like some sort of glowy Healy animation on your party. I think that does it a little better. Wevlin? Yeah, so we're cool. One of the worst boss encounters of the game, though. Just really ick. Just icky. And we want to build up to where we can, which means that if we can use Sacrum Crystals, that would be great. Aura of Valor. I forget if Aura of Valor fills your Spirit Bar completely or not. If it does, then we're just going to follow up with another round of Prophecy and get this thing down to like its last third. If it does some sort of Sacralin bullshit, then I will 100% just skip to the end of the boss fight. Like, if I see it cast Sacralin again, I will just do a cut, and we will not put up with that bullshit at all. So, here we go. Let's see what the result of that Aura of Valor was. Yep. And we could... I don't know who are all of our blue rogues that are listed, so we're going to use Prophecy again. Can't skip it. Enjoy the moon crashing into the enemy again. That's a bit of an oversight on the developer's part, because it is such a... But I mean, you also don't use this skill very often. I've been holding on to that Aura of Valor for a long time, or at least I picked it up in the Dark Rift, and I never saw... It's like, I wasn't like going to use it haphazardly. And I think this is probably the best place that you could probably use it. I think I said probably twice in the same sentence, but you can see, like, friggin'... Unless we run into some real bullshit, it's like, we're good. Now, it's possible that we can run into some huge bullshit with this boss, and it wouldn't surprise me, but...
Let's try this.
we can sort of manage. Hopefully. With this boss, you just want to burst it down as much as you can.
How about you?
That critical is certainly going to help. Next round we'll get it, unless it does some bullshit. Okay, next round it's dead. Done and done. So this was relatively painless considering how much of an annoyance it can be. But still one of my least favorite boss encounters of the game. We'll just have everybody go bananas. Maybe that will even do it right there. Yep. So we'll get the moon crystal, and that will be that. And I'll probably end as we get back to Yafutsoma. So decent amount of experience. We're in a good position. We're going to be pretty well off for the end game. Although, you know what? Nah, we'll get the crystal. This will be just a little bit of a longer episode. So we will get the crystal. I won't tease you like that. The blue crystal. I love the shade of blue here. The color of the room, it's really nice.
Yes.
So time to celebrate. Let's include Fina in on this one. They're gonna learn their that's amazing. And I love how she opens up. So we have received the blue moon crystal. Very, very good. So I will see you in Yafutsoma in the next segment. Thank you for watching. This one was full of stuff, wasn't it? I love you very much. I will see you in the next video. Bye.